So it's 9:30, March the 3rd, 2026. And this is the blood moon, the night of the blood moon. But my name is Alvin Ruley, and my podcast is called The Power of Inspiration. The first one that I'm going to do, I have series that I'll be doing, but the first series will be talking about the dimensions of learning. And with this one, since I got all the time in the world to talk, I'm going to talk about it, to tell you about the process of learning and talk about the different spectrums of learning. Understanding the value first of learning is important, because that's where we start to limit ourselves when we don't have a desire to learn. Okay? So for the thought of the different spectrums, you have a personal spectrum where your personal growth is. That's one spectrum of learning. And then you have a spiritual spectrum where your spiritual growth is. And that's another spectrum of learning. Okay, and for both of those spectrums, there's a process for learning. First step in that process is awareness. The second step in that process is knowledge. Third step in that process is understanding. And the fourth step in that process is wisdom. Once you get wisdom, you're going to seek more understanding, because you're going to become aware of more things. But awareness, that's what a lot of us, we lack exposure. When we lack exposure, we lack awareness. Which, as a talk, on personal growth as well as spiritual growth, each one of them, they have their own different identity or not identity, I'll say, but means for awareness, giving people awareness. The preacher and teacher, that's me. I'm a preacher and teacher. Okay, but, for all of us that bring a message that is designed to uplift people's spirits, all we can do is give you an awareness. For example, if you go to church and you go every Sunday, whoever the preacher may be, or whatever the message may be, that's only an awareness to you. Because that awareness, it leads you, and we'll go on to the spiritual side since we're on the personal growth, but they come together. But that awareness leads you to find a commonality for your growth. Let's say, for example, the prodigal son. Let's say you go to church and the prodigal son is the message. So, the prodigal son, just in case you don't know who the prodigal son or what the message is about, it's about a man that had two sons. And the youngest one wanted his inheritance before the man died. He got his inheritance. The man gave him his inheritance. His father called him by title. His father gave him his inheritance. And the young man went out and he lived life. He lived the life he wanted to live. And finally, everything materialistically that the young man was gone. His life, it came to a point where he was homeless, living and working with the pigs, swine, and saying they were eating better than he was eating. But then all of a sudden, this young man had a change of mind. He said, I'll go back to my father's place. Even the servants were treated better than this. So he went back home. Anybody before while he was having this change of mind, let's say this, he repented. He was going to bow down to his father and say how sorry he was. But when he went home, his father, he made him royalty. Gave him his coat, put his cloak on him. When your king put his coat on, that means it's like you're covered. No matter what you have done, you are covered. And they gave him his ring. The ring is a symbol of identity. It's like a brand. And then he killed the fatted calf and had a party for him. That's the story of the prodigal son. There's a lot more to it. Well, I got time. I'll have to treat this like I have to rush this. But his brother got upset. So when his brother got upset, that showed you that thing of the jealousy, because his brother had done everything that his father ever asked him to do. And so his father had explained to his brother that this son was lost, and now he's found again. So we celebrate. He was lost, and now he's found again. Okay, so taking that story, and let's take let's say the preacher talked about that. Right now I'm the preacher and the teacher. Okay, so let's talk about that for the dimensions of learning now. Remember, the focus is understanding the dimensions of learning. Okay, so you're aware of that story in the Bible. And that story has a lot of hidden mysteries within it. So that's where the dimensions come in. Okay. So let's go with personal dimensions that may come in with it. now let's bring it up to modern time. Let's not leave it back there where, he was in the pig pen, with the pigs, and they were eating more. We got homeless people. We got homeless people. And if you think about the dysfunctions that were created, systematically created, within the family structures over the past 50, 60 years. I'm 67, so I saw a lot of it. Those dysfunctions in the family, they also lead to affecting the growth, personal growth, and the spiritual growth. So, for the thought of the prodigal son, let's say it was a family, and we're going to go put it like the different levels for the revolution of the African American. Let's say in the 50s and 60s, this family, this brother, the man, he was the man. Because at that time he was working. He had a job, he was taking care of the family. And then all of a sudden the industry, the labor industry, changed. Okay, so for this family, the man ends up becoming the prodigal son. The man systematically became, because the black family structure is centered on the church, the man, and the family. That's the way it was, 50s, 60s, and if you want, you go way back there to 16, 19, or you can just go to Africa as a whole. So we go to the beginning of time, Adam and Eve, if you want to. But for right now, let's go back to the prodigal son. I gotta stay focused, but I got time. Okay, but anyhow, with the way the educational system in the United States of America, let's go with the segregation and the integration of school systems. Okay, me, myself, first grade, I was in all black school. First and second grade was together. Third, fourth grade was together. Fifth, sixth grade was together. Then, second grade, we integrated the school system. So it was black and white students. Okay. Now that was back in 64, 65. I graduated from high school in 1976, 11 years after the integration. And I was the first black to graduate from that high school in the top 10. Not because I was the smartest black to graduate from the high school, but I was the first black. My mother, she'd thought process if it was wrong. So that's where I got that from and get it from. But then I went off to the University of Maryland and studied black history. God opened my eyes. I'm still talking about the prodigal son now. I don't know what you think. I'm just talking about, you know, so realize Santa did pause and say, I'm still talking about the prodigal son. We're talking about dimensions of learning. So Jesus taught in parables to make it simple. Parables mean let's live life as it is, but recognize there are principles to life. I'll try to say that a little simple. The principles that you learn from a story are more important than the words you hear in a story. Okay, which gets back to like the preacher, or whoever reads the scripture and whoever performs or delivers the sermon. They're going to give you an awareness of a story that has mysteries, this one being the prodigal son. A person, a spirit that said, let's get away from here. Let's go on our own. We don't need no guidance and cover and be covered all the time. Let's go get it. And they go. But because that father had that love, that father was always available. Now, let's get back to the 60s. We were past the 60s because really 70s, 80s, and the integration and everything, the education system. So we're in the 60s. Graduation 76, right? So we'll get there. It's like now, it's like the family structure is really starting to fall apart. But the mother, the woman, that black woman, oh, she's a queen. All right, with the man losing his character to no fault of his own, but yet he's losing it because the job market changed. His skill sets wasn't needed anymore. So let's take you really quickly, not quickly, but through 1972 to 1989, 17 years. In that time period, the black man had fell 13% as far as with respect to employment in this country. The black kids, 47%. Let's say 50%. What difference does it make? Numbers weren't right anyhow. But 50% of them was graduating with a fifth grade education or below. You think about the generations now, as far as the age, if they're like 50 to 60, 70 years, 40 to 60 years old. It's like they're products of that. So it's like the woman, she became the father. and help nurture as much as she could. God's good because, let's be realistic, there was still a lot of family structures that was intact. Okay, but the thing that still was going on, even for the family structures intact, was the traditions. Times changed from what we had learned in the 60s as kids to what we learned in the 70s and what they learned in the 70s. Think of the generations. I mean, when I started working with a computer, it was like I was using the little cards and creating computer programs from DOS. Now I just pick up a phone, or you're looking at me from a phone, and I'm talking to the world, and all this from a computer. But, back to reality, I'm sorry. I just got sidetracked. But with respect to the woman in the family, she nurtured what was called the lost generation. A lot of them in this lost generation, saying, going through that 19-year period as far as 72, 89, they were in jail, incarcerated. They were drug addicts. I mean, it was like heroin, cocaine, crack. They were not in any position to make a significant contribution to the development of our society. So the woman, she went and got educated. She struggled through the whole process too, but she kept us focused as a society, not as just individuals, but as a society. So all of the prodigal sons, all of them, they got trapped by the systematic plan. Just to put it bluntly, it's like everything we live in is a systematic plan. The spiritual side of the dimensions of learning, talk about the systematic plan. I gotta say that we live in the world, but we are not of the world. That's the spiritual side. The systematic process of the world is, I'm going to say, easy for the spiritual side of the world to recognize. The spiritual side of the world, we deal with discernment. We deal with what information was we given, and what information did we have. And the information comes together based on the principles, back to, just the principles associated with it. One thing about truth, it evolves, but it don't change. So when you look at the family structure, this is on personal growth. in spiritual growth, say together. When it fell apart, when that man lost his role, and the woman had dual roles, two roles. God knew what God was doing, because through the isolation that a lot of men, black men, had to go through to become who they are now. And when I say who they are now, a lot of the lost generation have manifested into the sons of God. And you can't stop the Son of God from performing the works of God, because they have reached a level of desire where their desires are the desires of God. And when it comes to learning, they, Jesus gave us all directions for learning, okay? They seek the kingdom of God and all of its righteousness. So that's been implanted within the secluded, the isolated, the rejected. The systematic suppression of the mind is not as powerful as it was. And that's one of the joys of modern technology. All of the means to communicate. Because what went on for the thought of personal growth was miseducation, undereducation, lack of education, so those factors had to be rectified in order for the lost generation or any oppressed people. Oppression don't have, there's no boundaries for oppression, but you have to rectify the things related to the education process that are barriers. And with that comes first really re-educate. Now, you want to, yes, re-educate. Re-educating people. The challenge with re-educating people is that people believe what's written down in a book or what was written down in a book, And nowadays it's a challenge of, what do you see that's recorded? Is it real or is it not real? But with the understanding of the principles that are related to human growth, let's say it like that, as opposed to just the personal growth or just spiritual growth, but related to the human growth, it's like the use of information to develop processes. I love processes. To show people how to increase their desire. Not so much just how, but why. We'll say why they should to increase their desire to learn as much as they can about themselves. And so when people can do that, they empower themselves. But what you'll see, if you truly learn about yourself, you have to learn about others. That don't mean you have to be around others. That doesn't mean that. But you got to learn about them. Good has to learn about good. But good also has to learn about evil. Evil can't learn everything about good that good can learn about evil. Because God tells you whatever He wants you to know. So whatever God's going to tell you is going to give you the discernment that's needed so that whatever evil knows don't matter. So, I'm going to close this. I wanted to see, what a podcast is like. I've never done one before, but this is my first one. But I'm closing it for the thought of the prodigal son. We have a lot of prodigal sons. It's not just the male, so modern day prodigal sons. I'll talk about that again later in another podcast, so I can do that. Learning is a continuous thing. So I'll be talking about that continuously throughout each of the podcasts that I'll do. But I chose the dimensions of learning first, and then second, I'm going to do the Gospel of John. And really, it'll be the first chapter, verses 1 through 17, 14th chapter, and whole chapter 14, I think is what I did. And then 17th chapter, verse 1 through 17, which is the true Lord's Prayer, where he's saying his last prayer, and then tie the three of them in. So want to show you with that, for the thought of awareness, knowledge, understanding, and wisdom is tying them in to show how God is telling us that God is in Jesus, Jesus is in God, Jesus is in me, you, and you are in Jesus, and we're all one. So, explaining the Holy Spirit, basically. So that's what John will be about. And then the next will be the business plan development. Not say business plan, but I'll say business management development. And, with that, although it's designed with a business in mind, I'll say it like that, whatever size business, don't mind. But it's also on that level, spiritual level, where you recognize that you as an individual, you're a business. You live in anyone that manages anything, they're a business. Your rate of returns, that's what you're looking at. What are you getting back? What are you getting back for whatever you put out? Okay, so your business. Okay, so that side, and then go with the next one will be, dealing with history, the spiritual plight of the African American, and for that I'll go from 1619. I'm saying that because that's where my story that I wrote way back in the 80s, 1980s, started. But either way, we'll say 1619 to the 2026, but looking at the spiritual plight, when I say spiritual, it takes the speeches and show how that message is not just words that applied back then. There are words that apply through eternity. Okay, so, so that's what that'll be about, and how to use today. Okay, and then the follow-up to that will be, the Alliance of the Sahel States, the AES. I love what Trail Abraham is doing, and I recognize him as the Son of God in the manifestation, because the other side of how Black history is that they were taken from Africa also in 1619. So we got that 400-year period, and when I look at us as a Black people receiving a great substance, I reflect back on the Bible in Genesis 15, 13 through 14, when the Lord made a promise to Abraham that his seed would be carried off to a strange land. They'll serve that land and be afflicted by that land for 400 years, and God would judge that nation. And Abraham's seed would come out with a great substance. 1619, 2019, hey. Was 20 years, 30 years, 15 years between God and his children. But I thank you for the time right now, and I'll be back on.